Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the creative artistic side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where winter is coming. The nights are getting darker, the days are getting shorter. I'm starting to notice a lot more dawn and a lot more sunset in the sky, and a lot less daylight, which I guess is kind of fitting for this episode. After the slight shit show of trying to convince people that Inside was enough of a horror game to be a Halloween episode, people didn't quite agree, or at least not all of them. I ran a Twitter poll to find out if I could get away with that. The results were mixed, but I think no one would have any argument that today's game is a real horror game. The featured game of the episode is Paratopic. It's a short 45-minute indie game made by a 3-person studio that was first released in 2018, but has this year been ported to Switch, and I think it's been on a deep sale as Halloween approaches, as lots of spooky games are. This one's a really interesting one. I'm looking forward to talking about it. It's a big 180 from last episode where we talked about maybe the most AAA game, Red Dead Redemption 2, which I'm still playing. It's still dominating most of my gaming time. Having a good time with it. I'm really progressing in the plot now. Things are accelerating a little. So that's been most of my gaming time this week. But I did squeeze in Paratopic, which was quite easy because it's such a short game. But that said, I ended up playing it 3 times through because the narrative is confusing and a lot of stuff makes sense only on the second playthrough, and I still felt like after that I had some dialogue options that I wanted to go back to try and get more information, so I played it through a 3rd time. If there's time at the end of the show, I will also talk about a less spooky Halloweeny game called Speed Dating for Ghosts, another short game that I had a lot of fun with. That's another one that I finished in the last week. It took me, I think, just an hour or 2 hours to play through. That's a really cool, fun, kind of light-hearted game about dating ghosts. So it does what it says on the tin. But before we begin, I will mention that this show is patron-supported via Patreon. So if you enjoy the episode, or if you're a regular listener, you can go to patreon.com/gaminginthewild. I've added a tier in the last week for a $1 a month subscription. And for that you'll get extra episodes. You'll also get weekly eShop sale recommendations. So if you don't have much time for digging around in the eShop, it's a great way to find out some good games that you can get for a bargain price. So for $1 a month, or for 3 or 5, if you're a true believer, you can support the show. I really appreciate everyone that does that. So patreon.com/gaminginthewild if you're interested in supporting the show. And with that said, and with no further ado, let's get into it and talk about Paratopic. I've been thinking about how to describe this game, and what I came up with is that it's a game with a non-linear narrative. It's a capsule horror game with walking simulator and mystery elements. It was made by a studio called Arbitrary Metric. I believe it's their first game. It's a 3-person studio. The music is by Bo Chaotica. That's Bo, the first name, B-E-A-U, if you're interested in looking it up. You like the soundtrack? It's available to buy on Bandcamp and on, I think, Itch and Steam as well. I really enjoyed the soundtrack for this game, especially the ambient parts like the one that we're listening to now and the one that I used in the intro. Reminded me of things like Vangelis and Angelo Badalamenti, who did the David Lynch soundtracks, and also Arca, actually, the Venezuelan producer who I was really surprised to see a credit for on the Red Dead soundtrack also. Arca is a really cool experimental composer, producer, vocalist. If you don't know her work, I recommend checking it out. And the sound really adds a huge amount to this game. It's present throughout, it's eerie, it has lots of kind of sliding notes. It seems like it's speeding up and slowing down, almost in a way that suggests that time or some other kind of mysterious aspect is speeding up and slowing down, or that something's wrong, or that something's changing in the background, something like that. Really, really cool. And it's aided by the visuals, which are often the first thing people talk about in relation to this game. It's a very, very distinctive looking game. The developers say it's inspired by the 32-bit era, the fifth generation of consoles, which would have included Saturn, 64 and PlayStation 1. And I kind of lived through that and played through that era of gaming. And I do remember this look in 3D games of the time. It's kind of before they'd sorted out textures properly. And so what seems to have happened is that there would be like a polygonal form, like a low poly form, with something that looks like a low-res JPEG kind of wrapped over the image for detail. And throughout this game you can see that kind of pixelated low-res textures on walls and on the ground and on trees, but it's most noticeable on faces. It almost looks like a Tony Oursler artwork, if you've seen those, where he projects strange faces onto spherical forms, so you get this kind of weird wrapped around, slightly warped image. And the faces are very much like that. They're kind of pixelated faces that look stretched over like a balloon-shaped head, kind of. The game also exists in a very dank, murky, nasty colour palette. Everything is kind of mucky green, grey, brown kind of colour. Even at times in the game where there is a sunset, the sunset just looks like a kind of a stain spilling over the sky. It has a really nasty kind of atmosphere to the whole thing. So between this kind of affecting and effective audio presentation, which responds to the way you move as well, actually, it's very, very well done, and this low poly 32-bit visual style, and some cool effects actually. Sometimes it looks like a VHS tape rolling, as if it has a tracking problem, if you remember the VHS days. And other times there is digital distortion that wipes out what you're trying to look at. And the narrative elements that we'll get into. This game has a strong atmosphere. And for large parts of it, the horror elements aren't really present. They kind of come and go very quickly, more like moments. But the atmosphere, that something is wrong, that something's about to go wrong, is present throughout in all of the words, the atmosphere, these kind of strange pixelated faces, people that you talk to, and the fractured narrative that skips back and forward in time. The game does that using jump cuts and narrative splicing from different timelines, kind of. The whole thing is kind of intoxicating and has a kind of a nasty horror feel that seeps into you somehow. It's really, really cool. But I realise now that I haven't actually talked about how the game plays. It's a first-person game, so you spend all of this time, it's 45 minutes length, roughly. You spend this time looking through someone's eyes, and you will play as 3 different people throughout the length of this game, which is actually something I didn't realise on my first playthrough because I hadn't read the accompanying materials. So my first playthrough kind of doesn't count almost. It's like I felt like I was maybe playing different parts of one person's life, or playing someone at 3 different times. But it turns out there are 3 different people. There is a smuggler who has been tasked with taking a trunk of contraband VHS tapes over the Southern American border. There is an assassin who has been tasked with a hit. And there is a bird watcher who is just out for a walk and ends up in a strange situation. And you flick between these characters several times. So you're almost, whenever there's a jump cut, you're flicking from person to person. Sometimes they go to the same places, so you'll even walk down familiar pathways as one character, and then later in the game as another. and you will have conversations that are similar with some of the same people. So it's one of those games that is a real tangle. It's a narrative tangle, intentionally so. And that element of it is exacerbated by the fact that you're never exactly sure which character you're playing as, especially not on your first playthrough. There are also only 3 NPCs that have any dialogue. So there is a handler, a guy who's based out of the diner, interacts with a couple of characters in that scenario. There is a convenience store guy who at least 2 of the characters encounter on their drive to the border, and who offers some of the most insightful world building in the game, even if what he says and the information that he delivers to you seems to be a mixture of essential plot elements and colourful red herrings. And then the smuggler has a neighbour in their apartment who is also a speaking character that gives us some essential info. And I feel like all of these 3, on my first playthrough, I kind of ran through the dialogue quite quickly, as I tend to do, just kind of taking it in. But because the game is so short, there is an incredible amount of meaning and context and information packed into every interaction. So if you're going to understand this game, you really have to pay attention to those. And I just can't really. I think I'm used to playing games like Red Dead or Assassin's Creed Odyssey or whatever, where there is just pages and pages and pages of dialogue. And you're going to get the idea eventually. But in this game, you will only have 3 or 4 interactions in the whole game. So you're left with quite a lot of work to do as the player to figure things out. And even when you've played through 3 times like I have, I still have so many questions. I still feel like there are sentences that I maybe didn't internalize, or lines of dialogue that reveal more than they seem to at first. Oh, there is one more NPC that I forgot about. He's a border guard. He's in, I think, the first scene of the game, and he has a couple of lines as well. So as well as walking around as these 3 characters, in the diner scene, and in the assassin's block of flats, and in the forest area around the border, which is kind of a key location, and the convenience store that is along the way, there are also some driving sequences, and these are quite odd, quite an odd inclusion. I did listen to an interview with the main developer of the game, and they said that they had very carefully considered how long each scene is, and the kind of the narrative scenes where you're talking to people unfold at a pace that seems natural, but they are interspersed by these driving sequences where you can control the car a little bit. You can like inch the direction to the left and the right. You can't crash, you just kind of bounce off the rails if you crash, and you can speed up and slow down very, very slightly. You can punch the radio buttons and change the station. But these scenes last quite a long time. I think it's probably about a quarter or more of the total playtime of the game. So maybe 10 minutes you're going to spend driving with not an awful lot to do. So you're just watching buildings go by. Eventually you'll get out into the countryside and the sun will set as you're driving. These are sizable chunks of the game. And I did find myself getting bored in these. I reviewed a game called Road to Guangdong recently, where you go on a road trip with your grandma, and I commented on that game how the driving was a little minimal. It's pretty similar, it's just like left, right, speed up, slow down, but compared to the driving in Paratopic, that was, like a Formula One simulator or something, because in these driving sequences, there's really very little to do. Whether or not they're put there to add space to the game, they do indicate a long drive out of the city to the border, so they add that sense of distance, but they are not integral or that interesting. The contents of the passenger seat change occasionally between the crate of VHS tapes and the gun, which seems to indicate that 2 of the characters have done that drive, but nevertheless, they are a little boring. I guess the most entertaining thing about them is the sound of the voices on the radio. The voices in this game are really mangled, whether it's dialogue or whether it's the radio. They sound like this.
Oh, well, welcome back. Let's stay. Let's go. Now, this is welcome with Mr. Grip. Huh?
I understand what you want. And like, I want to pay on a car, and you want, but I don't want to.
Really weird. Kind of like this game, really. They're very much like the meaning is almost there. You can almost tell what they're saying, but it's just a little out of reach. And that's kind of how it feels to play Paratopic as a whole. The picture is there. The jigsaw pieces are there for you to try and piece together what is happening in this game, but it's always just a little bit out of reach. I think that's about as much as I can say about this game without getting into spoiler territory. So I think I'm going to do a little spoiler break here to discuss the plot of the game. So I will pop back at the end of the podcast and put in a little note here of what time you can skip safely ahead to if you want to skip the spoiler break. So I've finished the podcast now. Hello from the future. You can safely skip ahead to 25 minutes. So this is the spoiler break, and I'll be back in a second to talk over the plot and the specifics of what goes down in this extremely strange game. I do recommend it, by the way, so do look it up if you want a Halloween game. So my takeaways from this game are that from the information that I've managed to piece together from playing through it a bunch of times, the main source of information in the game is the shopkeeper, actually. So you can have some chats with this guy. He's just a guy who runs a convenience store, but he's seen some kind of strange things. And he lets you know that there was a power company down there that had an accident 14 years ago that kind of cleared out the area, and since then there have been strange things going on. He lets you know that there is a museum that collects paraphernalia and kind of broken down industrial stuff from the forest that he says behaves strangely sometimes. He also talks about some things that may or may not be clues. He talks about a giant ball of twine that just appeared one day that could be a prank, or could be something else. He also talks about aliens a little bit in a way that makes him seem a little bit tinfoil hat crazy. He's reading a book about aliens. He talks about aliens. He kind of, I don't know, he hints at it thinking that they are among us, or at least that there is something more than human among us. He also talks about like a kind of a broken down, haunted circus. So the things that he says really is like a soup of information and kind of conspiracy stuff. But it definitely feels like there are real world facts and his own theories dotted through what he's saying. And when you piece all of this together with the experiences that you have, first of all, in the forest, like there is a kind of industrial complex in the forest that you will explore. One of the characters is murdered there by a strange being, all of which is caught on tape, on CCTV. This murder, or different murders, seem to be the contents of the VHS tapes that are being smuggled. If you piece this together with the fact that the smuggler's neighbour is someone who describes themselves as hungry and demands a tape so that they can kind of feed. If you give them a tape, you then see them through a crack in the door turn into a monster as they are watching the tape and kind of convulse. And finally, the handler seems to indicate that there is in fact another species living among us, that this species is hungry, needs these tapes, and he calls it feeding dogs on scraps. And I think when he says that, he's talking about the neighbour who is one of these creatures and is hungry. So I mean, it's a little bit of a leap from here, but it seems like there was an energy company that, through some kind of research, has maybe opened up some kind of portal or created some kind of energy-hungry mutants that they can feed from the contents of tapes, that the smuggler is taking the tapes across the border. There is a cover-up, and the assassin seems to be tasked with cleaning up all the evidence. So the assassination, where you shoot the handler in the diner in a back room, the guy who was copying the tapes and distributing the tapes, seems to be a cover-up. If there was a cover-up, then the assassin is sent down to the border, where there has been a murder by one of these kind of strange creatures who kills the birdwatcher at the end of their plot line. So perhaps the assassin has gone down there to perform clean-up there too, to take away the birdwatcher's camera. We do see that the assassin has the camera. And then the smuggler is detained. The border guard watches the tapes and is transformed into one of these creatures, maybe, or kind of, I don't know, like warped out of existence or into the parallel dimension that they came from, maybe. I did actually notice one detail, which is that when the assassin finds the body of the birdwatcher, the body seems to have been skinned and is sort of strung up. But if you look at it closely, it's not dead. Its kind of arm has turned into a tentacle that is still moving, kind of creeping around this pole that it's been hoisted up on. And the final piece of the jigsaw that I've found is that in the woods there is a cabin, and if you go into the basement of the cabin, there is what looks like a big round device that has kind of exploded open. It's above a well and below a skylight. And at the end of the game, or the terminus of the game where the body is found, where the birdwatcher is killed, there is a large mast that has one of these circular devices at the top of it. And the very last shot of the game is the logo for Paratopic that we see on the cover of the game. And that is a picture of this antenna and this round circular device. So there's something about signals there too, and that seems to be significant. I haven't quite figured out what's what there yet. So, I mean, I still have so many questions about this game. That's my reading of it at this point, but I feel like it's definitely the kind of game that invites multiple readings. It feels like a jigsaw puzzle where all of the pieces aren't there, or if they are there, then you put it together and at the end you don't have a picture, you just have static or like a magic eye picture that you then have to relax your eyes to see. So it's really a matter of how satisfied you are with just accepting the atmosphere of this game, accepting the mystery and embracing the mystery, or whether you want to know what's up in the game, which is going to require some close reading of all of the text in the game, multiple playthroughs, and, you know, taking notes and trying to figure out what's what, and probably combing the internet for threads about the game, because the developer is quite active in places where the game is being discussed. So I feel like the truth is out there, maybe. I'm not quite sure. But I think that's all I have to say about Paratopic. I'm sorry if this was very convoluted and confusing sounding, but it's a very convoluted and confusing game, so that's just how it feels to play this game and how it is to try and think about it and to talk about it. So I do recommend Paratopic, 45 minutes long. I think it's just a few pounds. It's on Steam, it's on itch.io, and it's now on Switch too. Definitely a good Halloween game if you're looking for something spooky that isn't going to take, 12 hours like a Resident Evil campaign or something. So it's spooky, it's weird, it's difficult to understand, but it is atmospheric, engrossing, and quite brilliant in its own way. That's Paratopic. The second game that I'm going to talk about is a much less serious proposition. It's called Speed Dating for Ghosts. It was also released in 2018 on itch and on Steam, and it has also been ported to the Switch in 2020, but that's where the similarities with Paratopic end. This game is a really fun visual novel. What happens is you enter a round of speed dating. There are 3 different locations for you to go to, 3 different rooms that you can pick. You have a concierge called Fran, who guides you through the process and gives you some warm advice on how to proceed as a ghost yourself. And in each of the rooms you can have a round of speed dating with 3 different ghosts. You have branching conversations. You can choose how you want to respond, if you want to be positive or negative or neutral, and the ghosts will respond to you based on that. At the end of each round, you pick a ghost to go on a date with, and then you get to go on the date. It's a very simple, colourful game. The ghosts are kind of drawn in a black outline. It's really cool actually. It's kind of bright, kind of minimal. The music is good throughout. The dialogue is actually really good throughout. For such a simple game, it reminds me a little bit of something like Coffee Talk in a way. Although maybe you have more choice in Speed Dating for Ghosts than in Coffee Talk. You can really kind of shape how these characters are going to respond to you. If you put a foot wrong, sometimes there's no possibility to pick them at the end of the round to go on the date with. So I actually went back and played through a couple of rounds again, because there was one ghost in particular that I had made vanish, and then I wanted to see what their story was because they were so weird. So this game, I think, is about 1 or 2 hours to play, and it's very light. I mean, it does have some discussion of how the ghosts met their end, and so I guess needs some kind of trigger warning for people that are sensitive to that kind of debate. Some of it is very comedic, some of it is quite kind of serious or heartfelt. Some of the ghosts have kind of quite tender stories or unresolved things, and they vary from in when they died. One of my favourites was called Spooky Peter, and he was from back in the 1600s and is an old hand at haunting people. There's also like a young punk ghost who kind of comes with this kind of mischievous streak, and then there's like a kind of an old lady ghost who's very wistful and is very helpful to people and this kind of thing. But I won't spoil what the ghosts are and who they are, because the real joy of this game is finding out. There are 10 initial ghosts that you can talk to, and then they later released a DLC for it, which takes you to another place for another round of dating. So you can play another few ghosts there. Some of the best ones are in the DLC, I think. So this is just a quick review and a quick recommendation for anyone that's looking for a Halloween game but isn't quite in the mood for the kind of Lynchian horrors of Paratopic. It's kind of a mild, gentle, ghosty speed dating game. I believe it's also on sale, so you can get it for just a couple of quid on Switch. I think I got it for £2. That's Speed Dating for Ghosts. So that's our episode. Hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed playing through Paratopic, which is like a kind of a creepy, crazy art movie of a game. And also Speed Dating for Ghosts. I laughed a lot at Speed Dating for Ghosts. It's such a delight, it really is. It's so well written. It's a very simple game, but it's just so well written that it just really works. But I did actually do a thread on Twitter at Gaming in the Wild. I'm there if you want to talk to me or follow me. Asking people, what's your favourite horror game and why? And I got a really good wide range of responses actually. I think probably the most popular choice was Alien Isolation, which I've really shied away from playing because I'm really a complete horror lightweight. I get freaked out very easily and stuff sticks in my mind and freaks me out. And I watched the trailer for Alien Isolation, and as a big fan of the first Alien movie, it seems like a really good representation of that, sort of running around in the cabin and having one creature after you. It seems to be based on that finale of the Alien movie when it's Ripley versus the alien. But as far as I'm concerned, like, I heard the kind of the ragged breathing and saw that kind of darting from place to place, being stalked, and it was kind of like too scary for me, so I didn't feel like playing it. But there were a lot of really great suggestions here. A lot of people quoting the Resident Evil games. Alicia Brunskill says Resident Evil 2, the lickers made me jump a mile every time I met one. Kirk Lammy was into a game called The Darkness. He said amazing voice acting, evil superpowers, and a detailed semi-open world to explore. A lot of people picked Resident Evil 4, most of them saying something like no reason needed, because I guess it's just generally accepted to be the best Resident Evil game. People picked Outlast as well, and Silent Hill. Mumbo Bumbo picked Dead Space 2 and Fear 2. He says that they both managed to find the perfect mix of horror and action. Outlast again. Mr. Reckless 94 said Outlast because I nearly shat myself playing that game, and that's always a good thing for horror. I guess so. Corey Anglin also says Outlast, the first game to make me actually scared to play. Many games have made me actually too scared to play. There have been some games, not even really scary ones, games like Control. I couldn't even come back to Control sometimes, I had to take a break. Such a lightweight. Puggers, who is _Puggers with a Z, said Soma, such a great story and mind-blowing endings. A lot of people picked Soma. A lot of people picked Prey also. So a really good suggestion here. Lots of Dead Space, lots of Resident Evil, lots of Alien Isolation. I'm not sure that I'll be picking those up personally, as not a natural horror enthusiast, but I found it really interesting to hear what people think are the best horror games and why. If you're interested in taking part in chats like that, you can find me on Twitter at Gaming in the Wild. I'm also on Instagram, YouTube and Twitch. And of course there is the Patreon, so if you've enjoyed this episode and got this far, you can sign up for as little as $1 a month for extra episodes and other perks. That's at patreon.com/gaminginthewilds. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye bye, and happy Halloween.